Thank you for joining the Kootenay Conservation Program's Winter Webinar Series. This year, KCP's Winter Webinar Series focuses on the theme of Grasslands to Wetlands, Connecting Diversity. I'm KCP Stewardship Coordinator Adrienne Shaw, and I will be hosting this webinar. We also have Nicole Triggs in the background. She's the KCP Communications Coordinator, and she'll be monitoring the chat and ensuring everything runs smoothly. So as we're waiting for more people to join, we thought we would do a little poll. We're going to just talk about where you're based and what is your affiliation. So I'll just launch that. So if you could all answer the poll as we wait for people to join. All right, I'll just end this first poll here and share the results with you. Looks like we've got a lot of people from other places in BC, and 28% in West Kootenay and 16% in the East Kootenay as well. I'll just launch the other poll as we wait for other people. And if you could answer this poll. All right, great. I'll just share the results with you. So it looks like we've got 45% that are consultants, 23% government employees, and 19% nonprofit, 3% First Nation, 6% student, and 6% other joining us today. Glad you're able to share in this webinar series. So as we're moving forward here. Today is the second of 4 webinars. These are all excellent speakers, and I'm excited that we have them engaged in our webinar series. Upcoming, we have BC Soil Information Finder tool, because what's underground matters. That'll be Thursday, March 8th at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. We also have Lentic and Loaded Riparian Assessment, a standardized approach, Monday, March 12th, 10 Pacific Standard Time as well. Hope you can join us for those. We'd like to thank our sponsors. Without these sponsors, we wouldn't be able to host activities like this. And just to give you some webinar information, this webinar is approximately 45 minutes long with up to 15 minutes for questions at the end. As an audience member, you are on mute, and we'll be on mute for the duration of the presentation so that we don't have distracting background noise or feedback. If you're not familiar with the Zoom platform, take a moment to locate your control panel by hovering your mouse over the bottom of the screen. You can adjust your video layout between active speaker view, which is presenter, that's what you would be seeing right now, or a gallery view, which is the presentation. Enter any questions you have in the Q&A box, and they will be answered at the end of the presentation. If you're having any technical issues, please put your questions, comments in the chat box. KCP Communications Coordinator Nicole Trigg will be monitoring the chat and will do her best to help you. And the webinar will be recorded and made available on our website. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Albert Chirico. He is a Fish and Wildlife Information Specialist with Knowledge Management Branch in the BC Ministry of Environment in Nelson. Over his 20 years of experience, he has worked on and managed a multitude of fish and wildlife inventory projects, helped establish protective areas in the Kootenays, and helped develop the provincial reconnaissance fish inventory standards. Over the years, Albert has gained a variety of inventory and assessment knowledge on many fish and wildlife species, ranging from bull trout and white sturgeon to grizzly bears and elk. Currently, Albert works for the province in managing provincial fish and wildlife inventory standards, data, tools, and applications. I will now pass the screen off to Albert.
Well, thank you for that introduction. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. And I'm just going to start my presentation. And today we'll be talking about how to access fish and wildlife data the province stores in our data systems. All the demos of the applications are going to be live, so it should be exactly the way you will see it when you access the tools. And the access tools we provide are targeted for the public, consultants, industry, First Nations, and government. And warn you right now, when we're accessing live applications, sometimes things go wrong, sometimes the servers go down, and you'll probably notice that when you're using some of the tools. And if they are, just try them a bit later, because usually they're corrected fairly quick. So now let me go over briefly what we're going to talk about. We'll go through the data lifecycle, standards, data submissions, historic and current data storage. I want to go over these topics so everyone understands. A lot of effort goes into data management, so it can be made available through our applications. So no one gets the wrong idea that data magically appears like it does in Star Trek. I'll then go over our fish and wildlife tools and the province has to offer, what the future holds, and hopefully have time for some questions. I will go through the first 4 topics quickly, so to leave as much time as possible to go over the fish and wildlife tools. And we'll start with the data lifecycle. And usually the data is collected out in the field, and to use a live example, they just finished an elk survey in the East Kootenays. So currently they're writing reports, putting the data together. And then once it's completed in a report format, the data comes to us and it's stored, organized, and managed into our provincial data sets. And then once it's in our provincial systems, we build access tools to access that data. And then once it's in our systems, people will pull that data out. So when that elk survey is completed, they'll have all the information for that, and they'll probably look at their previous elk surveys and do some comparisons, see if the populations are increasing, decreasing, and then from that make some management recommendations if they should change the regulations. And usually what happens if there's a big drop in the species, and then they'll consult with public stakeholders groups and recommend changes to hunting regulations, and you see those in hunting synopsis. And then it all starts over again. They'll probably say, okay, how often should we inventory this elk population? And every 3 years, every 5 years, plan for it, get budgeting, and then they start the cycle again with collect and acquire data, and it goes back into the provincial system. And one thing I wanted to discuss was standards. There's a Resource Information Standards Committee, the RISC committee, and basically there are standards on quite a few different species, and some of those are fairly old, from the late 90s to early 2000s, but some of them are still relevant. And there are some newer standards. There's a new mule deer standard, what came out a few years ago. There's a field camera standard, which should be coming out in the next few weeks. They're currently working on a bat standard, and they're going to be starting caribou standards. And then we're talking about, should we do a new moose standard? And those standards are basically how the work is done. Then the other type of standards are data standards. Is if you're collecting something in the field, how should it be collected? Are you recording fish length in centimeters or millimeters? Or what are you using as your column headings? And basically their standards on those would tie into the actual RISC standards. And the reason for that is basically someone's out in the field, they collect data, they write it on a form, and we want to know, are they using the proper codes? What do they name that field? That data then basically gets entered in some type of spreadsheet, Excel, Access, and those field headings have to be the same as we have these load routines. And basically, if you add an S to a column heading, those load routines don't work. So basically, and that's why we have these data standards. And one question we get is, how do we get data? Now, a lot of the field data that is collected basically comes from government employees, and we work closely with them in getting that data into our provincial systems. Now, for consultants, in most cases, they need a fish collection permit from the province. And that permit states they'll have to give us the data that have collected in a specific format. This also occurs on the wildlife side. If you're doing a bird survey, though, you are not handling the bird species, so you do not need a permit. So then we work with the funding sources. So they will include a clause in their contracts that state you must give us the info collected. And we do also have an incidental observation form for the public, and I will just open that right now. And basically, if someone from the public is outside and they see something unique, a species they don't usually see, or a species what's rare, we have this site where they can basically enter their name, put the location down. And one thing is this site is going to be updated, and hopefully the new version is completed by the end of March, because the find location on map doesn't seem to be working. So basically enter the information in, was it live or healthy, click next, and then basically pick your date and then species. And then basically you can add photos and then submit the data to us, and that goes into our incidental wildlife sightings form, and then basically it becomes a point on a map. Now, I find a good way in understanding how we currently manage information is to look at the historic information products. Historically, people did their work, wrote a report, included data within the report, and maybe a map and photos, and all this was stored in a physical library. So basically, we had three different types of data: the actual written report, information that formed the basis for the report in a table, and maybe a map displaying where the photos or sample sites occurred within data, with data displayed on it. As an example, you sampled fish, you caught rainbow in a stream. In the report, you write, I caught a report at point X. In a table, in a report, you specify you caught rainbow at point X in a row of data. And on the map, you show you caught rainbow at specific spots. And the report is stored in a physical library. Now we duplicate this and improve on it with technology. Basically, currently people are still making the same reports with the same different components. We just store it differently now. The hard copy report is digital, and that is stored in our servers. Basically, this is a modern day library. The actual data collected that is in a table is usually stored in a database such as Access or Excel, or the province's final resting place Oracle. Now the map, well, the sample sites where data is collected are georeferenced, and these points have metadata attached to it, and that is displayed on some type of geographic information system. And today I'll show you how to access the different types of data through the provincial applications through the web. We'll start with fisheries. Now, the first app we're going to start with is EcoCat, and it's a digital library, and it has over 3,000 fisheries-related reports from the Kootenays and over 24,000 fisheries-related reports for the province. And I would just start it, and then basically you'll notice that it says public access and staff access. And the reason why some of the information is restricted is because, and the only fish information that is restricted is bull trout spawning areas. And the reason for that is poaching. So that's why we have two different versions. So then the bull trout spawning locations are protected. So if I click on public access, I would type in Summit Lake. And as you know, there's probably quite a few Summit Lakes in the province, and I'll do my quick search, and you bring up 126. And then one comment we get about this application is you bring up a lot of different reports, and you want to narrow it down. Now, the first thing you want to do is search for exact phrase, because if you're searching for all words, it's searching for summit, and that's searching for lake within the report abstract or the report name. So if I click on that, we drop the number down to 40, and it still could be quite a bit. We also have an advanced search option. So if I click on that, Summit Lake, search for exact phrase, you can choose, I just want fish, because EcoCat also stores terrestrial data, rain and snow data, parks data, air audit, vegetation, water, surface water, groundwater. So if I just narrow it down to fish and wildlife, I do my search, bring it down a few more, still quite a few. So if I go back, and then I can restrict on region, and then go Kootenay, search again, and I'm down to 17, a more manageable number to look through. And then if you click on it, it's a basic abstract, and then report. If I click on report, you can download the report. Now I'll go back, and then the other thing about EcoCat, like I said, it's a digital library, so it can also store map plot files, data files. If you have photos, the images could be stored video. So basically anything associated with that work, what was done, can be stored in EcoCat. So then the other thing I will mention is watershed groups. And basically, the province is broken up into these watershed groups, and they're related to watershed codes, and I'll talk about those a bit later. And then for the Kootenays, all you have to know is 340 is Lower Kootenay, which would be Kootenay Lake, and the Kootenay River, what runs from Nelson to Castlegar. That will be all 340. 349 is the Upper Kootenay River, so basically by Cranbrook. And then Pend d'Oreille is 330, and the other big one is Columbia. So the Columbia River and Arrow Lakes is all 300. And that's another tool you can use to narrow down your search. And there's also Kicking Horse Canoe and Illicilawat River. And then basically those are all the codes for the Kootenays. Now, so basically EcoCat, digital library. Now the next thing is fisheries inventory data queries. Now, basically, you have to think that we stored the report, and now what happened with all that data, what was associated with that report? basically, we have these load routines. It's loaded into our system. It goes into Oracle. So it's on a server somewhere, and this is a way to access it. So in other words, if I go my single water body query, and I type in Summit Lake, and the reason why I chose Summit Lake is there's quite a few in the province. So basically, there's 3 pages of Summit Lakes in the province. And I mentioned the watershed group, and you notice that which Summit Lake is you can see that this one starts with 340. So you know that this one is in the Kootenay Lake, Lower Kootenay River area. And Summit Lake actually flows into Bonanza Creek, which flows into Slocan Lake, which then flows into the Slocan River and the Kootenay system. So this watershed code actually tells you that this number is Bonanza Creek, then this number right here is the Slocan drainage, and then it flows into the Kootenay system. So there's a hierarchy built into it, and that's how I was quickly able to identify which Summit Lake it is. So now if I click on Summit Lake, I can bring up information, go OK, and then I bring up the information associated with Summit Lake. So restraints, enhancements, summary of fish species, fish observations, individual fish data, and then there's also physical data and stocking data. And if you wanted to download the data, you just click on one of these and basically open the data, and there's your data for Summit Lake. And here's some gillnet data with lengths, weights, sex, and so on. So if I go, and one thing about this site, FidQ, you do not want to click on this because it will actually kill the application and you're going to have to restart it. So just go either press on back to single water body query or click on FidQ here. Let's start over again. So that was single water body query. So if you have a stream or a lake, and basically you just want basic information, what fish species were there and so on, you can actually download it and get that specific information for that water body. Now there's also multiple water body queries, and this could be more, you know what, I want all information for a certain area. So you can pick a watershed group, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in 340, which I mentioned is the Kootenay Lake and the Kootenay River system downstream. And then basically you can choose what type of information we want. You know what, I want stocking information. And then basically fish species. Well, which species are you interested in? I can leave it as generic, or I can just say, you know what, I'm interested in cutthroat trout. I can preview the data, and there is basically information on stocking information, where the watersheds are, and then the strain, the species, the dates, and basically cutthroat was stocked in 1911 in Kootenay Lake. And then Slocan Lake, so on, basically 1911 also. And then some of the data sets are fairly large. So if I actually chose all species, it'll bring a fairly large list, and then you can email yourself the results. So I will head back again, and then there's also bathymetric maps. So in other words, you can actually go Summit Lake and search on Summit Lake, and this will show all the Summit Lakes in the province will actually have a bathymetric map. And so if I look at these again, you'll notice that 2 of them say 340. And if you look at it, one was done in the 80s and one was done in the 50s. So I'll click on this one. And basically, there is a bathymetric map for Summit Lake. So if I was going to fish this, I'll be probably fishing the big hole right here. Okay, so then the last thing I'll show you with FidQ, like there's a lot of information here, and the best way is just go in and play with it. You're not going to break anything. And then we'll look up stocking queries. And you'll notice that we were able to do it a different way before. Now this one, we're just doing a fish stocking query on just Summit Lake. I'll search it. Once again, it brings up all the Summit Lakes in the province. And then we want the 340 Summit Lake. Click on that, and then we have stocking records, and our records go back to the beginning of time. So the first time Summit Lake was stocked was in 1925 with Rainbow. The strain was Gerard's, and then basically it was 5,000 of them at the egg stage. And then the latest stocking was in 2017. And then we have some, they released 5,000, and they were 10 grams each. So basically, that's a quick overview of FidQ. So basically, we went through how do I get the report? How do I get the data for the report? Now, I want to see the data spatially, because maybe you don't know where where Summit Lake is, but you know where it is on a map. So I open up HabWizard, you get this screen, and you notice this is the latest version of HabWizard, February 2nd. We came out with it, and this one it'll work on your tablets, your iPhone. So compared to the old one, it didn't work that well. And there's no more, I think, if people have accessed it in the past, they were having issues with Microsoft not supporting Silverlight anymore. That's no longer an issue. So now I will launch the application. So this is basically your interactive map. And you'll notice when I'm in it, I'm going to be hitting on the same type of data. I'm just doing it spatially. So theoretically, the information we saw on Summit Lake, I should be able to access it through this application. And it just takes a few seconds to load up, and depending on your speed, it could be a little quicker or slower. So first comes up with is you have a map of BC, and there's a little inset map. I would close that, and then basically you can zoom in, and you notice there's these functions up here. Zoom in, zoom out, pan. So if you go pan, you can just drag your map, zoom in, and then zoom out. So basically, here's the Kootenays. And another feature I'll show you is a new feature we added is watershed search. You know the name of the system, and you know what? Once again, I will go Summit Lake, and I will go search. Now, this usually takes a few seconds because, remember, it's searching our database of all the names, and it brings up Summit Lake, and then I am interested in Summit Lake. There it is, 340. I click on that, and then it zooms me into Summit Lake. And I'll just zoom out to see if it's the right one, and then basically there's Bonanza Creek flowing into Slocan Lake, so it's the right lake. So, and then you'll notice that there is this lake report here. If you click on the lake report, it generates a PDF summary report. And some basic information, Summit Lake, you'll notice the watershed code again. Remember, 340 is Lower Kootenay system. 47200 is the Slocan drainage, and this one is Bonanza Creek. Then one question is, what happens if you have multiple lakes on Bonanza Creek? Is it will have a different water body identifier. So that lake will be identified by this number. So it'll be unique in the province to identify from all the other summit lakes in the province. So I'll close that, and then you'll notice I'll just click on the X, get back to the main screen here. Then you notice at the bottom here, home and layers. If I click on layers, you bring up, it will display all the information that's available here. If I click on fisheries, open it up, you'll see more. And it's defaulted for all fish points. So if I click on this, observations and summary. Difference between an observation is the observations are the red points. That's an actual sample site. Someone actually went there and sampled fish there. The summary is basically a summary. So in other words, what fish are in that watershed. So, and if you click on the eye up here and you click on one of these points, and I'll just randomly pick a point. So rainbow trout was caught at that spot. If I click on that, it'll tell me, okay, it was on Bonanza Creek. There is the watershed code again. And this identifies Bonanza Creek in the province. And then one thing I'll mention is this ACAT report URL. It's not filled in yet, and it will be filled in over the next year, and I'll explain what this means later. And then there's some basics: species caught, rainbow, and the source reference, fish habitat inventory, Bonanza Creek, FRBC project. And that's where that information came from. So if I click on the X and get that, click on the X again, I bring us back to this main list. And you'll also notice that obstacles to fish. So these are usually natural, and they could be culverts. And there's also another newer layer of stream crossings, which are basically man-made crossings. And if I open that up and zoom out a bit, and basically have to go to an area where I know there's data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom to bring the watershed query back, and we're going to go to the Castlegar area, and I'm going to type in Norns Creek. And lucky me, I think there's only one Norns Creek in the province. So when there's Norns Creek, I will kill that, and you can see I have my crossing layer, and if I open it, it will say red is a barrier, green is passable, and then there's potential. So if I click on I, and I click on one of these, I'll bring up the attribute information. So we know, okay, there's Norns Creek, and then there's this timber sales manager, Kootenay. If I click on that, okay, there's fish passage assessments. Then if I scroll down, there's information about the actual obstacle. And then if I want the report, I can click on this link. And so, and then basically there's that report for that data point. But then if I want this, I can click on this other link, go yes, and then there's photos. And basically, so this is just showing that there was a bridge there. So if I get rid of that, so then basically I'll go back to layers, close that. And then one question I had before I started my presentation is, can you show us how to do a map? So I'll quickly show you how to do a map. So basically I'm zooming out, and let's do a fish map. And what are we interested in? So let's say we're interested in, let's pick an invasive species. There's northern pike. I'll bring up our pike data. But you know what? I don't like this background. So you know what? I'm just clicking down actually on topography, and I want to bring up some imagery. So then there's imagery, and I look at it. Castlegar's over here. Pond array system throws down there. We have pike data in the Castlegar area, and then down by the pond array, which makes sense. Pike are probably coming in through the pond array, and they were caught here, and they're here because there's good habitat for them, and they're probably spawning in this area. So I just want to do a quick map. So and you notice at the top, there's these different navigation panes, and then I can go report maps, markup, and then there's analysis. So I'm going to go markup. I'm just going to make a rectangle and just go there, identify the area of interest, basically spawning kokanee, and then I want to go, spawning pike, and I want to basically do up a quick map. So I go here and I go basically, I'm just going to pan over, go print. And then basically what this do is this will make a nice PDF map. So I'll just name it Castlegar pike. And then down here it says print. Print that. Takes a few seconds. I open it, and there is a map. Castlegar pike, northern pike, and there's the area identified. Now, I don't want a nice map. I just want get an image of this and basically import it into my report. I can go export, and I want it as a JPEG. Create map, view image. And there's a JPEG right there. Now, there's a lot of data in Habitat Wizard, and it's a fairly powerful tool. And then I'll talk about the wildlife information on here a bit later. So I will just, one thing I will show you is maybe you're not interested in any of this data, what's available here. You can go, I want to add provincial layers. And this will basically show all the different types of layers we have available. And I want mining and petroleum and Dominion coal block coal. And I'll just randomly pick one of these. Coal grid unit, go OK. And basically, it will add that layer to the map. So, and basically, so thinking, okay, there it goes, and there's that new layer. It just took a few seconds to bring it up. And of course, there's no coal in the Castlegar area. I'll have to pan over to the East Kootenays. But in saying that, I know nothing about this layer, so I'm not too sure if it's going to display. But you know what? I'm going to go back to my topography. So I will close that application. So basically, as I mentioned before, you have a report. It's stored in EcoCat, our digital library. The data for that report is basically stored in Oracle, and we access it through this fisheries inventory data queries. And then we have a mapping tool to spatially display the data. But these two, FitQ and HabWizard, they're hitting the same data. It's just different ways of accessing the data. Now I'll go to wildlife. Now, basically, wildlife is similar, that it has a digital library, but it's a completely different format. And there's reasons for that, and it's basically the two groups were separate at a point, and they had their own basically digital libraries, and then they were joined as one group a few years ago, and it's too much effort to basically combine the two different applications into one. So it's a standalone. So in other words, this is the wildlife digital library. So basically quite a bit different, and I'll just randomly pick, let's say, elk, and then there's targeted. Always select yes, because if you don't, if someone's doing a sheep survey and they see an elk and they write it down on their data sheet, you can have one elk record in a data, and if you don't click yes, it will show that report data for that sheep report. So I pick elk here, I want to go region, and then I can search. So basically, there's 6 pages of elk reports for the province, and then I'll just randomly pick one, and then we got Rocky Mountain Trench. If you click on it, there's some objectives about the project, and then the surveys. There was work done in 07 to 11 to a telemetry project, and another one 12 to 16. And then if you want to download the report or any of the other data, you can. And there's a 2011 report by Becky and Tara. Now, the structure of this is different, and this is actually changing. We do have a project, and it should be done by the end of March to make this a little more visually appealing. And then you'll notice there's a lot of data here, and you have to look really closely to find out which one you're actually interested in. Where we're basically cleaning it up. So we've broken up into the different components like it is in EcoCat, and then different years. So I will close that, and then I will open up Habitat Wizard again. Now, the wildlife data is basically broken up into 3 different components. You have your incidental observations. So that is basically, you're doing a survey, an elk survey, and you see, oh, I saw a coyote. That coyote is an incidental observation. Your main survey was for the elk. So, so you have incidental observations, you have the actual survey observations, and then you actually have telemetry observations. So if I click on layers below here, and like I mentioned, fish is always defaulted, unclick that. I'll just zoom randomly to the Nelson area. So basically, I'm just using pan to zoom in. Then I'll open up the wildlife layer. And there is the incidental observations, survey obs, telemetry obs. So if I click on here, and then if I go survey observations, and I open the plus sign, you can see that basically we have different survey obs. And then if I zoom in a bit more, and some of these layers are scale dependent. And that basically means is if you're zoomed out too far, it's not going to show those points. And the way they do that is basically it's time. If they measure how much time, because if there's a lot of data, it takes too long to load it. So they say, you know what, we're going to cut it off. We're not going to display that information at that layer, at that scale. And then, because speed means quite a bit, and as you can see, just loading up that layer took a few seconds. If I was zoomed out further, I'm bringing up more points, hitting on more data, and it takes longer. So basically, see, there's actually quite a bit of data. So this is basically all of our survey ops. So if I click on I, and I randomly click on any of these, okay, so it looks like there was some elk work done there. And why I'm bringing up multiple ones is you have points stacked up on top of each other. So if I click on that, elk, it basically brings up information about what that was. There was a project details, you know, and the observer. But there's also this web link. It's like, you know what? That's nice. I know that there was work done in this area. I want to see the report now. You can actually click on that link. And this will take you to the actual report. So that way the actual data is tied to the report. And one thing I mentioned earlier on, and I'm just clicking X to get back to this screen, is on fisheries. If we go back to, I'm just gonna go to Norris Creek again. Okay, so we're at Norris Creek. I open up fisheries, close that, and bring up my pike again. And if I click on my pike there, northern pike, the EcoCat report, what I showed you in the other data, what was NA, and here it's filled out. And of course, it's not working. Theoretically, this will bring you to EcoCat and the actual report. So, so I'll just, I know I'm jumping around quite a bit. There's just a lot of information here. So I would just go back and then show you that there is a lot of wildlife information, and we do have it broken up into the different groups. So reptiles and amphibians, insects, red and blue listed species, and then we even have exotics. And then there's some telemetry data. We also added some caribou distribution data. And then the CDC, we also have their endangered species and ecosystems data available through Habitat Wizard, wildlife management units, GAR orders, sensitive ecosystems, old growth, terrestrial. And basically, we work with the provincial habitat staff to say, what do you want to see here? And then we added all these for their purposes. And then for the wildlife and fish bios, we have our wildlife and fish layers. And then once again, like I mentioned, you have access to all the other provincial data, be it mining, parks, forestry, all the data is there. Now basically, I will close Habitat Wizard and I'll open up CLIR. Now, CLIR is another digital library. Like I showed you EcoCat, the fish library, and then I showed you the wildlife library, which we call SIWE. And then, so what CLIR is, once again, we have public and staff. It searches multiple libraries. So it's an umbrella search engine. So this will search basically EcoCat, SIWE, and then Environmental Protections Library, Ecosystems Library, the NRS Library. So if I go Summit Lake, search for exact phrase, and remember there's also an advanced search here. And this will bring up a large list. But for the Kootenays, 95% of the fish reports should be in EcoCat, and same with the wildlife side. So I usually recommend those because here we have 6 pages, and you can see that most of the information, it's, oh, this one's in EcoCat, this Western Toad and Summit Lake is in SIWE. And then you can click on it and download it. But if you're just like, I just want to find information, what's around Summit Lake, use CLIR because it's hitting on multiple libraries. Then the last thing I want to show you is, you know what? The products you have are nice, but you know what? I want to download the data myself. And I have my own GIS platforms. I want to use Google Earth or some other platform. Just show me where the data is. I want to download it. I don't want to use any of the provincial apps. So I'm just going to go all fish. And it basically, I can query it, known BC fish observations. I think that's the one. If I click on that, I can basically download this data into different formats. So a geodatabase, a shapefile if I want to import into ArcInfo, CSV files, or you know what, there's a KML. So basically, you can download that, open it, the KML, and what this will end up doing is open it up in Google Earth. You know, so, and there Google Earth is opening up, and those points will be displayed. And close that, and then we're just zooming in, and then basically there it is, all fish points. Then it has a different fish species, and I'll click it on, and it'll slowly load, and it's basically downloading. But I'll let you guys play with that yourselves, and I will just basically. And so this actually has quite a bit of data. So in other words, if you want the wildlife data, you just search wildlife, and then and there it is, wildlife species inventory. Then we got management units, and you can download the data yourself and do whatever you want with it. And then basically the future. In April this year, we're starting Species and Ecosystems Information System Modernization Project, and we call it SIWE. And I can give you this nice fancy definition of what it is, and it's basically we're going to be redoing our fish and wildlife data systems, and looking at what we're missing, what should be done, what standards should be updated, and then what should we be doing for access to the data, any data we're missing, what we should be collecting. And that's starting in April, and then it's going to be a multi-year project. And as you know, data systems are expensive, and basically it's a fairly expensive project, and that's where we're going down the road. And then on the meantime, we're basically continually to improve our systems, update it with existing data, and so on. And then I thought I'll show you a picture of my computer system right here. And then any questions?
Thanks, Albert. I'll read a few questions from people. With the fisheries inventory data queries, are these up to date with EcoCat reports, or is there still a lag between data in EcoCat being uploaded?
A few years ago, there was probably a 2-year delay, but 2 years ago, we got an influx of cash, and basically we're from a few years out of date, we're basically a few months. So the EcoCat reports should be fairly recent, and then the data associated with those reports are basically up to date, a few months.
Great. Next question, is there an app that identifies known stakeholders within an area? If no, are there plans to create a known stakeholder hub? No plans for that yet. And yeah, that's actually the first time I've heard for that request. But like I mentioned, we're going to be starting that, looking at redoing our data systems and size them. And if that falls to the top, and then we will consider it. Great. Next question. I've had conversations with CDC staff about this, but have not been able to get a clear response on what to do. I have a number of BioBlitz reports, of which the most recent one has close to 400 confirmed observations. I have flagged the species at risk listed red-blue species, so we have their coordinates. I understand that I can submit these as rare plant or incidental wildlife sightings, but what about all the other data? I would really like to get the BioBlitz reports published to SIWE or EcoCat, but there were no collection permits needed. So not sure how to get these reports into the provincial system. CDC staff seem interested in getting the reports, and data is in iNat, and the reports are published on the associated partner websites, but it would make sense to centralize this data.
I agree totally, and then just contact me and I will get them into the appropriate locations, be it SIWE, the wildlife reporting system, or EcoCat. And then if you have a lot of data, we have different templates for, I mentioned there's incidental observations, there's surveys, and then there's telemetry. We have a template for each of them. We can actually load the data into a template. We have load routines. We'll load it into our provincial systems, into Oracle, and then it'll be a point on the map. So just contact me.
Excellent. Thanks, Albert. Are there plans for including data regarding wildlife habitat values?
There is, like, values. Are you talking wildlife habitat features? We actually do have a wildlife habitat features layer, and then we're basically in the process of we have to do some modifications to our servers to accommodate that data, but we already have the process made, if I go back to EcoCat, to actually show those wildlife habitat features. And then in saying that, some of it is restricted, like salt licks is not one thing we're going to display because of concerns around poaching and so on. So, but yes, if your value is referring to wildlife habitat features.
Thanks, Albert. The next question is, if we submit a report to EcoCat through Albert, does he also want the raw Excel files with data as well?
Yes, we want everything. If you have photos, raw data, the report, maps, you name it, we can take it. And the other question we get asked is size. And then usually some reports are fairly large, include a lot of photos and so on. And then we have people submitting us documents that are 120 meg. And then basically what we do is we'll cut it in half and then basically load it as part 1, part 2. And we usually can have 50 to 60 meg. The system folks don't like it, but we still do it anyways.
Great, thanks, Albert. There's just a comment here saying if we could use your email to post for attendees afterwards, if you're comfortable with that. Albert?
Sure. That's what I'm here is to answer questions about our data systems. And then even if you're using one of our sites, basically there's going to be some type of email link to it if you notice a mistake or something. You can basically send an email in, and that eventually gets to me, or you can just email me or call me directly. And even if you're using like Habitat Wizard and you're wondering, how do I do this? You showed me this, and I'm not able to, I can't remember how to do it. Just give me a call. That's what I'm here for, and I can go through it step by step. Because there's a lot in like Habitat Wizard I didn't show you just because of the time restraints.
Well, that's excellent, Albert. Thanks. That's the end of the questions. I'd just like to thank you, Albert, for presenting today. That was a great presentation. And thanks to everyone for joining us in today's webinar. Please expect a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to an online post-webinar survey with just 7 questions. We appreciate feedback. It helps us plan future webinars. And we will also include Albert's contact information and the links to all the sites that he had talked about today. Our next webinar is BC Soil Information Finder Tool, because what's underground matters. And that will be March 8th at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. We hope you can join us. A registration link will be included in your follow-up email, so we hope to see you then. Thanks again for joining us, and have a great day.